Hello, viewers. My name is Professor Goodman, and I am a historian and professor at Dingle University. Today, with the help of my 6 colleagues, Professor Bruce Wayne, Professor Sigma, Professor Tate, Professor Perez, Professor Fandom, and Professor Sulik, we will delve deeply into 15 events that caused, shaped, and concluded the American Civil War. To start, I will briefly discuss what the Civil War is. The Civil War of the United States was a conflict fought in the United States from 1861 to 1865 between the Northern States Union and the Southern States Confederacy over issues including slavery, states' rights, and preserving the Union. It resulted in the defeat of the Confederacy and the abolition of slavery. With that being said, let's dive right in. To kick things off, we will talk about the Compromise of 1820, which was signed into law by President James Monroe. The Compromise of 1820 was a legislative agreement to maintain the balance of power between free and slave states in the United States. It admitted Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state, while prohibiting slavery north of the 30-degree parallel in the Louisiana Purchase territory. The Compromise of 1820 emerged amidst escalating tensions between the North and South over the expansion of slavery into new territories. By admitting Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state, while also establishing the 30-degree parallel as the boundary for slavery, it temporarily addressed these tensions. However, it also set the stage for future conflicts by highlighting the conflicting differences between the North and South over the issue of slavery expansion. It's like constructing a timeline of events leading up to and following the Compromise of 1820, revealing its place within the broader narrative of American expansionism and sectional conflict. Prior events, such as the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, set the stage for the debate over the extension of slavery into new territories, while subsequent events, like the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, further intensified sectional tensions. The Compromise of 1820 elicited varied responses from different regions and groups within the United States. While some Northern abolitionists saw it as a necessary compromise to preserve the Union, Southern slaveholders viewed it as a temporary solution that failed to address their concerns about maintaining the institution of slavery. This shows the different points of view of the United States residents from the 1820s and after. To conclude this first event, the Compromise of 1820 addressed central issues such as the expansion of slavery into new territories and the balance of power between free and slave states in the Union. It reflected the ongoing debate over states' rights versus federal authority and foreshadowed the deeper conflicts that would eventually erupt into the Civil War. Exploring these central issues helps us illuminate the significance of the Compromise of 1820 in shaping American history.
Let's now turn our attention to Nat Turner's Rebellion of 1831. Nat Turner's Rebellion presents a challenge in distinguishing fact from opinion. Facts include the rebellion's occurrence in Southampton County, Virginia in August 1831, and Nat Turner's leadership, however, interprets vary. Some view Turner as a freedom fighter, while others see him as a misguided figure whose actions lead to violence. For example, while it's a fact that the rebellion resulted in the death of around 60 white individuals, opinions on whether Turner's actions were justified vary widely. Some argue that they were a justified response to slavery, while others see them as a tragic and misguided. The interpretation of Nat Turner's Rebellion varies amongst historians and scholars, reflecting different historical perspectives. Some view Turner as a heroic figure who resisted oppression and fought for freedom, while others see him as a controversial figure whose actions led to violent repercussions for both enslaved and free individuals. Examining those different points of view allows us to appreciate the complexities of Turner's legacy and its impact on American history. Nat Turner's Rebellion serves as a reminder of the brutal realities of slavery in the United States and the lengths to which individuals would go to resist oppression. Turner's actions sparked fear among slaveholders and intensified debates over slavery and its moral implications. Understanding the historical context and varied perspectives surrounding Nat Turner's Rebellion enriches our understanding of his pivotal event in American history.
Following Nat Turner's Rebellion, we will talk about the annexation of Texas. The Texas annexation, also known as the annexation of Texas, refers to a series of events that led Texas to become the 28th state in the Union. Following the Texas Revolution, which lasted from 1835 to 1866, Mexico refused to recognize the treaties that ended the conflict. As a result, Texas sought the protection of the United States and voted to join the Union. Different historical perspectives are presented by the annexation of Texas into the United States. After the Texas Revolution, annexation was seen by Texans as a chance to restore security and stability. Supporters of the United States saw annexation as a means of advancing their country's economy and territorial dominance. But there was also opposition to the annexation and worry about it, especially regarding the spread of slavery and the possibility of war with Mexico.
For the fifth event, we will cover the Mexican-American War. The Mexican-American War was a conflict between the United States and Mexico that lasted from 1846 to 1848. The war was primarily caused by a territorial dispute over Texas, which the U.S. had annexed in 1845. The key question was whether the border of Texas ended at the Nueces River, as Mexico claimed, or the Rio Grande, as the U.S. claimed. The annexation of Texas by the U.S. in 1848 directly led to Mexico-American War in 1846. This is because the annexation sparked a territorial dispute over the border of Texas. The war ended in 1848 with the Treaty of Guadalupe Delgado, which saw Mexico cede a large portion of the northern territories for the U.S.
Both sources agree that the war was a U.S. desire to expand its territory. However, they differ in their perspectives. Grant viewed the war as unjust, while the article provides a more neutral account detailing the events and consequences without expressing a personal opinion on the unjustness of the war. Both sources are essential for a comprehensive understanding of the event.
Thank you, Professor Solik. Very well said. Now we will cover a very important congressional proposal, the Wilmot Proviso. The Wilmot Proviso was an unsuccessful 1846 proposal in the United States Congress to ban slavery in territory acquired from Mexico in the Mexican-American War. The Wilmot Proviso, including David Wilmot, were against the expansion of slavery into new territories. They believed that the territory should be reserved for free white laborers, which would promote labor competition and benefit the North. On the other hand, the Southern Democrats wanted to maintain and expand slavery. They saw the expansion of slavery as a way to increase their economic prosperity and political power. These contrasting viewpoints led to a shift in American politics from party lines to sectional lines, highlighting the deep divisions within the country over the issue of slavery. The central issue during the time of the Wilmot Proviso was the debate over the expansion of slavery into territories acquired from Mexico. This was a contentious issue that divided the nation along sectional lines and was a precursor to the American Civil War. The problem was further complicated by political maneuverings, such as President Polk's appropriations Reconciliation Bill and the failed attempt to extend the Missouri Compromise line to the new territories. These political strategies were designed to maintain the balance of power between the North and the South, but they only served to exacerbate the tensions over slavery. The story of the Wilmot Proviso is filled with instances of chance, oversight, and error. For example, the Senate never voted on a bill due to the miscalculation in the timing of the filibuster by Senator John David. This oversight led to the expiration of the congressional session without a Senate vote on Polk's bill, causing the Wilmot Proviso to expire as well. This incident shows how even small errors can have significant consequences in history.
The Compromise of 1850 was a collection of congressional legislation proposed by Kentucky Senator Henry Clay to resolve sectional issues in the United States regarding slavery after the Mexican-American War. The Compromise of 1850 was a pivotal event in the timeline of American history, particularly in the context of escalating tensions over slavery. It was a direct response to the territorial disputes that arose from the Mexican-American War and the admission of California as a free state. The Compromise attempted to maintain a balance between free and slave states, but it was a temporary solution that did not resolve the underlying issues. The Fugitive Slave Act, which was part of the Compromise, sparked outrage in the North and led to increased sectional conflict. This conflict would escalate further with the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854, which effectively repealed the Missouri Compromise of 1820 and allowed the people in the territories of Kansas and Nebraska to decide for themselves whether or not to allow slavery. These events are all interconnected, each one influencing and shaping the next and leading the nation on the path on the Civil War. The Compromise of 1850 was the result of intense debates and negotiations that reflected the different viewpoints of the time. Key figures like Henry Clay, John C. Calhoun, and Daniel Webster represented diverse perspectives, issues like slavery and state rights. Clay, known as the Great Compromiser, advocated for a compromise as a means to preserve the Union. Calhoun, on the other hand, was a staunch defender of the Southern interests in slavery, and he warned the cession of the South's interests were not protected. Webster, a Northerner, supported the Compromise and a stronger Fugitive Slave Act in an attempt to maintain the Union, even though this stance was unpopular in the state of Massachusetts. These differing viewpoints provide a multifaceted understanding of the complex attitudes towards slavery and state rights during this period. The central issue during this period was the conflict over slavery, particularly its extension into new territories. The North and South fundamentally different views on this issue, leading to intense sectional conflicts. The Compromise of 1850 was an attempt to address this issue by balancing the interests of the slave states and the free states. It included measures such as the admission of California as a free state, the enactment of a stronger Fugitive Slave Act, and the decision to let the territories of Utah and New Mexico decide for themselves whether to allow slavery. However, these measures were controversial and failed to provide a lasting solution. The tensions over slavery continued to escalate in the following years, culminating in the Civil War. The Compromise of 1850 highlights the challenges and complexities of dealing with deeply divisive like slavery and the difficulties in finding solutions that satisfy all parties involved.
Thank you, Professor Tate. I myself am learning many interesting facts that I didn't know before. For our next event, we will cover the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The Kansas-Nebraska Act was a significant U.S. legislation that allowed the territories of Kansas and Nebraska to decide for themselves whether or not to allow slavery. A concept known as popular sovereignty. However, this effectively repealed the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which had prohibited slavery north of latitude 36 degrees 30, leading to increased tensions over slavery and setting the stage for the American Civil War. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 was a significant event in the timeline of American history. It was a direct response to the unresolved issues from the Compromise of 1850 and the ongoing debate over the extension of slavery into new territories. The act effectively repealed the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which had prohibited slavery north of latitude 36 degrees 30. This led to a series of violent confrontations known as Bleeding Kansas, further escalating tensions between the North and South. These events are interconnected, each one influencing and shaping the next, leading the nation closer to the Civil War. The Kansas-Nebraska Act was proposed by Democratic Senator Stephen A. Douglas, who hoped that the idea of popular sovereignty would resolve the mounting debate over the future of slavery in the United States. However, the act was controversial and sparked intense debate in Congress. It highlighted the differing viewpoints of the time, with some seeing it as a way to allow the people to decide on the issues of slavery, while others viewed it as a dangerous step that could lead to the expansion of slavery. The central issue during this period was the conflict over slavery, particularly its extension into new territories. The Kansas-Nebraska Act was an attempt to address this issue by allowing the people in the territories of Kansas and Nebraska to decide for themselves whether or not to allow slavery within their borders. However, the act effectively repealed the Missouri Compromise, which had maintained a delicate balance between free and slave states. This led to increased tensions and conflicts, culminating in the violent confrontations known as Bleeding Kansas and eventually leading to the Civil War.
Well said and very true, Professor Brisling. Now, we will delve into a very violent period in the Kansas Territory, so buckle up, ladies and gentlemen. This is getting serious now. Bleeding Kansas was a period of violent conflict in the Kansas Territory from 1854 to 1859 over the question of whether Kansas would enter the Union as a slave state or a free state. Bleeding Kansas was a period marked by intense and violent conflicts, which are fueled by starkly contrasting viewpoints on the issue of slavery. On one side were the pro-slavery settlers, largely from Missouri, who believed in the right to own slaves and saw the expansion of slavery as essential for their economic and social order. On the other side were the anti-slavery settlers, primarily from the northern states, who viewed slavery as morally wrong and sought to prevent its spread into new territories. These differing viewpoints were not just individual beliefs, but reflected broader regional and political divides within the country. The central issue during the period of Bleeding Kansas was the conflict over the extension of slavery into new territories. This issue was deeply rooted in the economic, social, and political differences between the North and South. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, which allowed the territories of Kansas and Nebraska to decide for themselves whether to allow slavery, was intended to resolve this issue. However, it only served to exacerbate the tensions. The act led to a rush of both pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers into Kansas, resulting in violent conflicts known as Bleeding Kansas. This period serves as a stark reminder of the difficulties in resolving deeply divisive issues and the potential consequences when such issues are not adequately addressed. The Kansas-Nebraska Act, which led to Bleeding Kansas, can be seen as a result of oversight and error in judgment.
Very interesting, Professor Sigma. Now, we will explore one of the most controversial court cases in United States history. The Dred Scott case, also known as Dred Scott versus Sandford, was a decade-long fight for freedom by a black enslaved man named Dred Scott. The Dred Scott versus Sandford case is a prime example of the differing viewpoints that existed during this period in American history. The Supreme Court, led by Chief Justice Roger B. Taney, held the view that African Americans, whether free or enslaved, were not citizens and therefore had no standing to sue in federal court. This decision reflected the prevailing pro-slavery sentiment among many in the South and the highest court of the land. On the other hand, abolitionists and anti-slavery advocates in the North vehemently disagreed with the court's decision, viewing it as a gross violation of human rights and justice. This case thus highlights the starkly contrasting views on race and slavery that existed during that time. The Dred Scott decision brought to the forefront the central issue of slavery and its status within the expanding territories of the United States. The case stemmed from Dred Scott's claim to freedom based on his residence in free territories. However, the Supreme Court's decision, which effectively ruled that Congress could not prohibit slavery in the territories, exacerbated the already tense sectional conflict over the issue of slavery. This ruling deepened the divide between the North and the South, contributing to the rising tensions that would eventually lead to the Civil War. The Dred Scott decision can be seen as a significant oversight or error in the nation's history. The Supreme Court's ruling, which denied citizenship to African Americans and removed restrictions on the spread of slavery into the territories, was a drastic departure from the principles of freedom and equality. This decision was widely criticized and is often regarded as one of the Supreme Court's greatest mistakes. It serves as a reminder of the potential consequences of legal and political decisions and how they can have far-reaching and unintended efforts on the course of history.
Very well said, Professor Goodman. Now we will talk about John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry in 1859 was an attempt by abolitionist John Brown to incite a slave revolt by seizing a United States arsenal in Harper's Ferry, Virginia. However, the raid failed when Brown's group was defeated by U.S. Marines, and the anticipated widespread slave rebellion did not occur. John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry was a significant event leading up to the American Civil War. The raid was an effort by abolitionist John Brown to initiate a slave revolt in the southern states by taking over the United States arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. This event can be viewed from different historical perspectives. From the abolitionist point of view, this was a necessary step towards ending slavery. However, from the perspective of the South states, this was seen as a direct threat to their way of life and economic system, which relied heavily on slave labor. The central issue at the heart of John Brown's raid was the deeply entrenched institution of slavery in the United States. Brown intended to use the weapons from the arsenal to arm slaves and spark a widespread rebellion. This event highlighted the growing tensions between the North and South over the issue of slavery, which would eventually lead to the outbreak of a civil war. There were several elements of chance, oversight, and error involved in the raid. For instance, Brown underestimated the response his actions would provoke. He expected that the local slave population would join his revolt, but this did not happen. Furthermore, Brown's group was ultimately defeated by a company of U.S. Marines led by First Lieutenant Israel Green. These factors played a significant role in the failure of the raid.
The secession of the southern states was a major event that occurred in the timeline of the American Civil War. It began on December 20th, 1860, and extended to June 8th of the next year, when 11 states in the lower and upper South severed their ties with the Union. This event was directly related to the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860, which many southern states viewed as a threat to their rights and their institution of slavery. The secession of the southern states can be viewed from different historical perspectives. From the perspective of the southern states, they believed their rights were being threatened by the North, particularly with the election of Abraham Lincoln, whom they feared would abolish slavery. From the perspective of the North, the secession was seen as an act of rebellion against the Union. The central issue leading to the secession of the southern states was the dispute over slavery and states' rights. The southern states, where slavery was legal and integral to their economies, felt threatened by the growing resistance to slavery in the North. The election of Abraham Lincoln, who was seen as anti-slavery, was the final straw for many Southern states, leading them to secede from the Union.
The attack on Fort Sumter marked the official beginning of the American Civil War. This event was directly related to the secession of the Southern states, which had begun in December 1860 following the election of Abraham Lincoln. The attack on Fort Sumter escalated the tensions between the North and South, leading to the outbreak of the Civil War. The central issue leading to the attack on Fort Sumter was the escalating conflict over slavery and states' rights. The Southern states, where slavery was legal and integral to their economies, felt threatened by the growing resistance in the North. The attack on Fort Sumter was a direct response to these tensions and marked the beginning of the Civil War.
And finally, we are exploring our last pivotal moment in American history today. The Emancipation Proclamation issued by President Abraham Lincoln on January 1st, 1863. This proclamation came at a critical juncture as the nation grappled with the Civil War. The Emancipation Proclamation was a significant event in the timeline of the American Civil War. It was issued by President Abraham Lincoln on January 1st, 1863. During the height of the Civil War, this was a strategic move designed to undermine the Confederacy, as it declared that all enslaved people in the Confederate-held territory were to be set free. This shifted the goal of the war from merely preserving the Union to also abolishing slavery. The Emancipation Proclamation was seen differently by different groups. For abolitionists and African Americans, it was a beacon of hope and a significant step towards freedom. However, it was also met with criticism because it did not free all enslaved people, only those in Confederate-held territories. Moreover, its enforcement relied on a Union victory. The central issue during the time of the Emancipation Proclamation was the Civil War, which was a conflict between the northern and the southern states, primarily over the institution of slavery. The proclamation addressed this issue by changing the force of the war to include the abolition of slavery. The Emancipation Proclamation is often interpreted as a turning point in American history. While it did not immediately end slavery, it changed the nature of the Civil War and made the abolition of slavery a Union goal. It was also paved the way for the 13th Amendment, which would ultimately abolish slavery. There's also relevant and irrelevant information that can be taken into consideration. For relevant information, the Emancipation Proclamation was a significant event in the Civil War that declared enslaved people in Confederate-held territories to be free. It changed the focus of the war and paved the way for abolishing of slavery. For irrelevant information, the physical condition or location of the original document of the Emancipation Proclamation does not impact its historical significance. If the United States had thought of making the Emancipation Proclamation earlier, the United States would have developed better economically and would have not relied so heavily on slavery or slave labor.
Thank you all for listening, and we hope to see you all in the next video.